The Phoenixville Library. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Pinto, the Adult Services Director here, and I am particularly thrilled to have back with us June McInerney, a local author whose Novels of Phoenixville series has immortalized so far the likes of the Colonial Theater, the Columbia Hotel, Phoenix Hose, Hook and Ladder, Valley Forge General Hospital, and other locales. And now with Miss Elmira's Secret Treasure, she immortalizes our beloved library. And its first director, Elmira Pennypacker, also a few current staff members, thank you, June. And
yeah, you are a character.
I am a character in the story, yes. And even a few of our supernatural residents. Oh, that's a secret? Oh well. June has copies of this book and some of her other books available for purchase and signing tonight. And by the way, this particular book, Miss Elmira, is a very appropriate read for this month, Black History Month, as the Underground Railroad figures prominently in the book, as you will hear. All right, so now to give us the backstory of her new novel, please welcome June McInerney.
Good evening. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me back for the fifth time here at Carnegie Hall. No, but it kind of feels like I'm playing Carnegie Hall. So I want to thank you all for coming on such a miserable damp night, and I hope that our interaction will warm everybody up, and we'll have a decent time and we can learn something about Phoenixville. No, is that going to help? I have microphobia.
Trust me,
Now, let's get this thing on the road here. All right, okay. How many of you are not familiar with my work? Oh, wow. Only 3 out of how many? 28, 30 people here? Gosh, I'm impressed. Well, for you three. About 4 years ago, I wrote and published my first novel, The Prisoner's Portrait, which is about the World War II prisoners of war, what is now the University of Valley Forge. It used to be the Valley Forge General Hospital. And it was about a particular German prisoner, a young man who didn't want to be in the war, hated Hitler, and became friends with the Lutheran minister. And he did a portrait, he was a painter, he did a portrait of Martin Luther in incarceration at Walburg Castle in 1522. And that painting right now is in the library of the university, and I wrote a novel about it. And I had fun doing that, and it was greatly received, and it was my first presentation here, and I decided, gee, this is like neat, maybe I'll write another novel. So I found a newspaper article published in the Mercury, no, not the Mercury, it was the Evening Phoenix, and it was about a monster found along the banks, trails of a monster found along the banks of the Schuylkill River. Turned out to be a cryptoid, which is what Nessie is, the Loch Ness Monster. So there's this little miniature Nessie in the Schuylkill River. So I wrote about her. The article was published on April 1st. My novel was published on April 1st. That gives you a clue. But it was a tongue-in-cheek, and I really had a lot of fun doing that. So then I'm driving down the street about a couple of weeks later, and I'm seeing that there's a for sale sign on the Columbia Hotel. Now, when I first moved here, I used to date this really good-looking guy, and we loved to go into the Columbia Hotel for dinner. They made the best martinis, and the bar was hand-carved mahogany. And I don't know if you are natives here, you remember the obelisks, the naked ladies on the mirror, right? That's all gone, okay? Including the marble transom that the steel workers on their hobnail boots would walk over to the bar. That was their hangout, and that's gone too. Well, a lot of other things were preserved. The exterior was preserved. It's still a very nice place to eat, but it's still not quite the same. My apologies to the owner, but I thought a novel. Also, it's haunted. So I wrote about the Columbia Hotel, which is set in the early 1900s, The main character is a woman named Faith Little, who is not so little. She's about 6 feet tall, and she has a little faith, and I had fun writing about her. And it's a murder mystery. And it turns out that with each of my novels, I'm starting to commit crimes. Thank goodness it's only on paper with my laptop, because I'd be, you know, the police chief would come get me, and you'd all have to post bail. All right, okay, so I solved a murder, and that was very well received, and I came here, and Mark was kind enough to have me here, and I said, this is, you know, whatever. So what's the next crime I'm going to commit? So it turned out to be about the our fire department, because I had met Dave Meadows, and I don't know if Dave and his wife are here, but I met him during an exhibit at the Historical Society, and there was an exhibit of the fire department, and I was like, wow, this is like really cool, because I had an uncle, my Uncle Dougie, when I was growing up in New York in Dallas Ferry, he was the police chief, and he also drove the back of the hook and ladder, and he always used to tell me, if you're going to turn right, you got to turn a little left. It always confused me, but I remember him also playing Santa Claus on the back of that ladder, and I said, I want to write a novel about him, but I don't live in Dobbs Ferry anymore, and so David said, write about our fire department. And I spent weeks and months with him learning all about the fire department, and I learned how to put out fires, and I learned all kinds of terminology, and then I wrote a book about the fire department set during World War I, and this was published in 1918, which was the centennial of the ending of World War I. What was the crime committed in that? I don't quite, oh yes, arsonist. Yeah, we had an arsonist, and you have to read the book to find out how he set fires and how the main character joined the fire department to get out of going to war, and I'll leave it at that. All right, so a month later, I'm driving down the street, going to go to a movie, walking into the Colonial Theater, and I'm going, this is interesting, and there's a bank next door. Well, what used to be next door to the Colonial Theater was the National Bank of Phoenixville, which was founded in 1840, 1838. During the renovations, the Colonial Theater took over the building, and that's the main lobby now. And I thought, this is kind of interesting. And I didn't think anything about it. I'm at the Historical Society, and I see an article about a bank robbery that happened in 1926. Okay, so we have a bank robbery, we have a bank, we have the Colonial Theater, and we have Mary Foote, who needs to be immortalized because she's done so much for our community. And I contacted her, and we met, and I got the grand tour, and I wrote about a bank robbery based on a real bank robbery with a character who wants to be she's the ticket director, and she wants to be like a movie star, okay? And she gets waylaid because she falls in love with the head of the gang that robs the bank. So you have to read that, and that was fun. That was a little tongue-in-cheek, and I learned all about the Roaring '20s, and I learned to do the Charleston. All right, so I took a couple of months off because after 6 books, 5 books, I was a little exhausted, and so was my dog, and because I would tell him about all these stories and stuff, and he was like, okay. So I decided, So I'm in the library one day, and I'm talking to Mark, and Mark says, well, you've run out of things to write about in Phoenixville. I said, no, it's this whole Bridge Street and Main Street, all this, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. He said, well, it's time you wrote about the library. And I said, aha. So I said, is it really haunted? I mean, is this place really haunted? And Mark says, well, I have never seen anybody, but come back in a couple of weeks, we'll take the grand tour, we'll see places that other people have not seen, you know, upstairs in the attic, and we'll talk to staff, and we'll see. And I'm going, okay. So I put on my Ghostbusting sneakers. And I came on a very, very cold January, and Mark and I began to fledge out the plot for Miss Elmira's Secret Treasure. And this is what came about. Now, Miss Elmira, as Mark said, was our first library director from 1898 to 1916, and she died at the tender age of 57 or 58. Do the math, I'm not quite sure about that. And so I wrote the book about her life, past and present. There we go. This is the only extant picture of her that I found. I did a number of research I went through, and I want to thank Esther Loretta right here, who let me excerpts from the novel of Esther Griffith Liggett, who was a distant cousin of Elmira by marriage. And I went through those texts, and this is the photograph that we came up with. Elmira was born on December 15, 1859 at Garden Spot Farm in Upper Providence. She was the second child of John Adams Pennypacker and Hannah Wells. And her brother, her brother James, I'm sorry, thank you, Loretta, was born in 1856 and served in his adulthood for many years as the chief controller of the Phoenix Bridge Company. Now, when Elmira was 10 or 11, her parents moved here to Phoenixville to a large house on the corner of Hall and High Street, Main and Hall Streets, where they had a boarding house. And this was right across the street from the Masonic Hall, the old Masonic Hall that's now for sale. The house is no longer there. The original house was torn down, but the Masonic Hall was, as some of you will recall, was recently the Bacon Me Crazy restaurant. Anyway, that's where they lived for a number of years. Now, this is a genealogy chart. I don't know if you can see how clearly you can see it. Somebody on Facebook knew that I was writing a book about Elmira, and I got on Facebook and I said, okay, I do a lot of my research on Facebook. You'd be amazed how many people, you're from Phoenixville, they say, June's writing a book. And, they'll contact me and they say, I have this and I have this information and I have that information. And somebody sent me the genealogy of Miss Elmira, proving that she was third cousins with Samuel Whitaker Pennypacker, okay? Now, Samuel Whitaker Pennypacker was our governor from Pennsylvania from 1903 to 1907, and he was a prolific author and historian. And he wrote the Annals of Phoenixville and its vicinity. And if you haven't read it, do so. It's a fascinating account of the history of Phoenixville until 1874. And he self-published, and there are copies available at the Historical Society. It's only $19, and boy, you talk about, a couple of evenings learning about Phoenixville. And, if everybody who moved to Phoenixville, if I could give them a copy, it would be a requirement. I think all the realtors should say, what do you know about our community? Oh, no, nothing much, the rents are high, Well, here's a copy of Mr. Pennypacker's book, and you'll know about the history. I just found it a really valuable resource, and when I get bored, I can just pick up a copy and I'll walk around reading it. I've learned. Well, I used to walk my dog with a book in hand. Saying, okay. Anyway, that's just a sideline. Don't mind me. Anyway, when Elmira was born in 1859, the Underground Railroad was very active in Chester County. Here's a map of the main routes. And note that they tend to avoid more populated areas, and that's for good reason, because if you're a fugitive slave, you don't want people to notice you, and you don't, of course, want to be involved with anybody that's going to turn you in or is going to report you to the slave catchers. So those that ran the Underground Railroad made sure that their routes were circuitous around populated areas. The less people, the less chance of the fugitives are seen and caught. I'm not going to go into the history of the Underground Railroad. I'll give you some few salient facts about the three primary stations on the Underground Railroad, but I want to refer you to Jack Artell from the Historical Society, who is an expert, and on occasion he will do a presentation. I don't know if he's done one at the library yet. If he hasn't, he has. Is that on video?
Probably.
It should be on YouTube. Okay. if you get a chance, I don't know how many of you have access to YouTube. Just look up Jack Hertel or the library. It's absolutely fascinating because I didn't think that here in Phoenixville there'd be a lot of people involved in the Underground Railroad, but yes, there was. And one of the people that was, a prominent abolitionist was Elijah Funk Pennypacker. And Elijah Funk Pennypacker was a distant cousin of Elmira's. And he and his second wife, Hannah, owned White Horse Farm off of White Horse Road. The house is still there. I'm sure you all know. It's a big, white, kind of colonial. It was a farm. It's still a private residence now, I believe. But here's a sketch of him that I copied from the website from House Divided. And he was a very, very tall, lanky man. And he looks stern here, but from what I gathered from my research, he was a very kind man. And he also served as the president of the Commonwealth's Anti-Slavery Society. He and his second wife, Hannah Adamson Pennypacker, had 8 children. They had 2 boys and 6 girls, and 2 of the girls unfortunately died in childhood. But in the novel, Elmira becomes a favorite niece. They're not really aunt and uncle of Elmira, who she visits periodically and learns about the Underground Railroad, where the White Horse Farm was the stop. It was one of the major stops. And this is White Horse Farm. The top picture is what it looked like in the 1860s and later in 1990. Elijah made a lot of restoration to the house. It was old when he first bought it, and so he added a sleeping porch and he added columns and he refurbished a lot of things. And over the years, subsequent owners have revitalized it. And if you get a chance to go past it, it really is a beautiful example of Phoenixville architecture and a little bit of our history. The other 2 prominent stations here in Phoenixville is the Quaker Meeting House on Nuts Road in the corner stores, okay? And the other one is Fitzwater Station. And that restaurant, that was built in the early 1830s, 1840s, and it was the station on the Underground Railroad, hence the name station in the name. And they make the best turkey club sandwich and martini, so I sometimes go there, and especially in the summertime, and I'll sit and I'll watch the ducks go by, and I'll look and I'll say, well, you know, the slaves used to take boats down, the fugitive slaves would be ferried down the canal to Philadelphia. And I thought, gee, that's kind of like really kind of fascinating. And I spoke to one of the waitresses, and she was really excited about the history. And the next time I went back, I was introduced to the manager and the owner, and we had a very lively discussion about Fitzwater Station. So there's a lot of history here. And let me get back to, okay, excuse me, I have to find my cursor. Now, from what I gathered in my research, Hannah was a skilled quilter. How many of us here are quilters? You quilt? You know about messenger quilts? Okay, all right. She really was such a quilter that she designed messenger quilts. And I wanted to touch upon that in the novel because that is significant to the Underground Railroad. And the quilt, somebody may ask, what is a messenger quilt? It's a theory that quilts during the Civil War were sewn by both slaves and station masters on the Underground Railroad prior to the end of the Civil War as signs to assist fugitive slaves on their journey northward to freedom. Patterns and symbols connote specific messages and instructions, where to go, what to bring. And they also designated safe houses where the fugitives could find shelter and food and people to help them on the next leg of their journey. This is the cover of a book by Eleanor Burns and Sue Bouchard describing 15 messenger quilt blocks. I don't know if you're familiar with our quilter over there. I don't know if you're familiar with Okay, no, that's fine. They're history, meanings, and instruction. I started to learn to quilt a while ago, but I found that for me it's the ancient art of acupuncture, and so I'd rather weave words, you know, sew words into whatever, into the fabric of paper. But it's a fascinating art, and I have a neighbor who is an absolute ace at it, and you know, she comes over and she shows me her quilts and what she's doing. And I'm like, geez, I wish I could do that, but you know, can't do it. And I really, but anyway, there's a whole section in the nonfiction section of our library about quilts. And if you get a chance, even just to look at the pictures, absolutely fascinating. I have a book at home, a coffee table book called The Quilts of Gee's Bend, about the African-American women who live on this little island off the coast of South Carolina. And they handmade quilts out of bits and pieces of clothing and old blankets. And they're absolutely beautiful. And there was an exhibit about 6 years ago at the Philadelphia Museum. And I went to see that, and you know, we're not allowed to touch, but this was history in the making, because some of the quilts were 100, 150 years old. Absolutely fascinating. So I got fascinated with messenger quilts, and I said, okay, one of my characters is going to make one, and she's going to give it to Elmira when Elmira was a teenager, and this is going to become Miss Elmira's treasure, or at least one of her treasures. All right. So there were 4 blocks that were most commonly used on messenger quilts. The monkey wrench on the left designates a blacksmith who at any particular site could provide tools for the fugitives. It also alerts slaves if they see it on the fence of the plantation that they were going to escape from, to pack up all your tools, you know, pack up all your cares and woe. Here we're going to go escape. The flying geese on the right are directional signals, and they point the way to a safe house. Now, on a typical messenger quilt, these flying geese would point one way. I don't know why they point in different directions. It's a little piece of information I'm not familiar with, couldn't find out. The other 2 is the log cabin on the left, and that indicates a safe house where the runaways could find food, shelter, and a place to hide from the slave catchers. The wagon wheel alerts slaves to pack their wagon, gather their gear and belongings, and prepare to leave. Now, coupled with the log cabin, the wagon wheel signifies a safe house where the owner, or the station master, or the captain, whoever was going to convey them to the next destination, had a wagon with a secret compartment. And so they would go into their secret compartment and they'd load hay and goods on them, and they'd be driven to the next place. And Elijah Funk Pennypacker, this is exactly what he did, because he would get fugitive slaves coming in, and he would load them on his wagon, and he'd take them down to Norristown, where another gentleman on the Underground Railroad would then take them down to Philadelphia, where they board a boat, and then they'd go to New England and find their way to Canada, which is the ultimate destination. Now, there was an article that Miriam Clegg, C-L-E-G-G, I can't quite, Clegg, wrote in an article for the Historical Society about safe houses and homes in Phoenixville that have secret tunnels and passages, especially the older homes. I don't know if you live in an older home, you may want to knock on walls to see if there's any hollow spaces there. The article was the September 1988 issue of the Historical Society newsletter, and she wrote about the secret passages and rooms where the fugitive slaves could hide. And there was a tunnel on White Horse Farm that went from the basement of White Horse Farm to an outbuilding. And I'm not sure if it was an outhouse or a barn, could be both. And Mr. Pennypacker would instruct the slaves either to hide in the basement while the slave catchers were searching the house, to go into the tunnel and hide in the outbuilding. And the tunnel was dank and it was dirty, but it was a safe place. It was eventually closed off in 1911. The safe places, the tunnels and the secret passages were also used by those freemen who were people of color who would work in the households of the more prominent and richer families in Phoenixville. And if they knew the slave catchers were in the area, they would hide in these tunnels. Because what the slave catchers, who were very, very greedy, would do is they would capture these freemen and they bring them back to the South and sell them into slavery. Even though they were, as the word connotates, free men. So the tunnel on White Horse Farm inspired me to write a scene, and this is based on a true story. The slave catchers were coming through the area, and there was a family of slaves that were hidden behind a panel in a young woman's bedroom. And it was late at night, and she, of course, was in bed, and she was sound asleep, and the slave catchers were very adamant, and they come marching through the house, and they're knocking on doors, and they say to the owner, "This is the last room that we've searched. We know the slaves are here. We can't find them anyplace else. Open this door." And the owner says, "No, my daughter was sleeping there." And the slave catcher says, "I don't care who it is, open this door." And the owner says, "Well, but it's my daughter, and she's a young woman, and you, being a Southern gentleman, would not want to disturb the boudoir of a young lady, would you?" And the slave catcher goes, "Oh, no, I don't want to." And so he leaves with his cronies and saved the slaves because he was, quote, a gentleman. The story is in the book, and it's more and more elaborate. I elaborate a bit more on that. I just wanted to tell you that. One of the characters is based on George Pennypacker, a cousin of Elijah Pennypacker, who in fact was a slave catcher. He started out life buying and selling slaves up and down the east coast of the South. He served on the Gray side, and during the Civil War, he was wounded and he was mustered out, and so he became a slave catcher. And he also is in the book, so I had to tell that story. Now, Elmira retains the vivid memory of her first visit to White Horse Farm, where she hears runaway slaves in a secret compartment behind her bed where she's staying, and she calls them runways. And she remembers that on that particular day, her Aunt Hannah had finished a messenger quilt, which in the center was the Phoenix rising. And she wanted to know, what does that mean? Now, I'm assuming that everybody knows how Phoenixville got its name. Do you want to hear the quick story about Phoenixville got its name? Okay. Louis Vernwag was a prominent German bridge builder who came as a young man to Phoenixville, the Phoenixville area, actually to Philadelphia in the 1840s. And he built a really fabulous bridge over the Schuylkill River, and that was among 300 and some odd bridges that he built up and down the East Coast. But in 1811, the nail factory, which was the first nail factory in the United States, here in Phoenixville, on the site of our foundry, you know the story, was failing, and it was sold, and 3 investors from Philadelphia bought it, and they said, "Well, we can't manage this ourselves. We need to have somebody come and manage it for us." And they hired Louis Vernwag, and he came to Phoenixville, and he looked at the nail factory, and he made some renovations, and he built the house on 1910 Main Street, which is the oldest residence. It's now a business. And he built a beautiful, beautiful house on what is now High Street, overlooking the nail factory. And at that time, the nail factory had a big, tall smokestack from the furnace. And he was standing on his back porch, and it was at night, and it was just a cloudless night, and he sees the flames spewing from the smokestack, and he says, "It reminds me of the phoenix that rises every 500 years from its own ashes, and in the morning it arrives as a young phoenix." And that's what I'm going to name the nail factory. It's the Phoenix Iron Works. Well, as time went on, the Phoenix Iron Works became one of the major employers in the area. And when the Postal Service began, the postmen and the post people would call the area the Phoenix area or Phoenixville. And it wasn't until 1849, when the borough was incorporated, that they formally adopted the name, and that's how we got Phoenixville. So here we have this phoenix in the middle of a messenger quilt, and Elmira goes back to her Aunt Hannah at White Horse Farm to find out what all this means and what the history of Phoenixville means and what all the symbols on the messenger quilt are. And eventually Hannah gives the quilt to Elmira, and Elmira has it for the rest of her life. Now, Elmira was an avid reader. I mean, ever since she was a little tyke. And from what I gathered, one of her favorite books was Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland. And her father brought her a copy when it was first published from the Reading Terminal, because he would go, and they had the farm at Garden Spot. He would take meats and food and vegetables, and he would sell them at Reading Market. And Reading Market, there was a bookseller, and he would buy books not only for himself, but for his daughter. And she was like so enamored, and she would climb trees to hide in the nooks to read. I used to do that. I had a big old maple tree in my front yard. That's where I was, sitting there reading in the summertime. How many of us have done that and found secret spots to sit and read? Yeah, okay. All right, well, Phoenixville in those days didn't have a library, didn't have a public library. A need for that in 1857 was a gentleman named the Reverend Joseph F. Janison. He was minister of the First Presbyterian Church. So he started a young man's literary unit. The operative words are young man. They didn't allow women, they didn't allow children. And as Elmira was growing up in her teens, she learned about this and she was incensed. The only books that she had access to were the books her father had bought her and what was in her father's own collection and study upstairs and at school. But she went to a school where young girls were only taught to dance and to sew and, to cook and to flirt and not to learn the history and not to learn, all the good things that modern day women today do. So she finally found out about the Literary Society, and in the novel she goes and she talks to the assistant director, Mr. Kurtz, K-U-R-T-Z, Isaac Kurtz, Major Isaac Kurtz. And she convinces him to hire her, for $1 a week as his assistant, doing nothing more than maybe cleaning the books, cleaning the shelves and restocking the books, only for the privilege of being able to read any of the 1,200 books and periodicals that were housed in the church library, in the basement of the library of the Church Street School, which is now the Senior Center. Okay, so she worked there for a while, and it wasn't long until after the borough decided, well, maybe we do need a library. And so I wasn't sure what the arrangements were made, but a free library was formed. Miss Elmira was still became the assistant librarian, and the Literary Union donated all of their books to this free library, and now it was housed in the basement of the Lutheran Church, which is now Sacred Heart Church on Church Street. Okay, and that's next door to the Alliances to Phoenixville, 148 Church Street, which was the home of Mr. Griffith, who invented the Griffith gun. Yeah. Now, did you know that? Okay. This is before he moved to where the Community Health Foundation is now. But if you read any one of my novels, everything gets connected, and I even get confused. So in 1895, Elmira's 36 years old, okay, and she's persisting. I want a free library. I want a building. I want its own building here. Well, in June 28, 1895, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania passed the Act of Assembly, passed a resolution that enabled the formation of a public library in each community. And this would be under the auspices of the school district. But you gotta have permission from the borough council first in order to do that. So Elmira goes to the borough council and she says, we can have a library. See, it says here in the paper that the Commonwealth passed this resolution. And the borough council goes, we don't have the money. And Elmira says, we'll find the money. We have a need. We're bursting at the seams out of the Lutheran Church. And she gets the attention of Colonel Hamilton H. Gilkerson. Colonel Gilkerson was a prominent attorney who was once a Burgess. He served on borough council for a while, but he was a prominent attorney. And she becomes friends with him, at least in the novel they become friends. And they convince the Board of Trustees to at least figure out a way to at least begin the foundation of a library. So the Borough Council finally says, okay, we will appoint a Board of Trustees for the library and see what they can do. So in 1896, the former Young Men's Literary Union transferred its 1,800 books to the now fledgling library. And the trustees, by the way, if any of these names are familiar, the president was Horace Lloyd. We had Harry Sawyer as treasurer, Isaac W. Kurtz, the superintendent, who was the director of the library, Mr. Broomall, Mr. Lippert, Mr. Parsons, Mr. Keenan. I don't know if it's in relation to James Keenan, but his name is James Keenan, and H.F. Leister. And the gift was accepted on April 6th. And here the newly formed library is finally housed in the basement of the Lutheran Church. All right, it's now the site of St. Antoine. It's now the Sacred Heart, which I understand is also closed. Is that true? Why? It's a beautiful church. Oh, yes, and Alliances uses it sometimes. Yes, okay, thank you. I should have known that. I do some volunteer work for Alliances in the form of writing, and got to know the director, so anyway, he sent me that as a name. This good-looking guy, okay, is Andrew Carnegie. So Elmira learned about Andrew Carnegie and how when he was growing up in his small town of Dunfermline in Scotland, was poor, but he had an uncle who would give him books, and he introduced him to such literary greats as Robert Louis Stevenson and Robert Burns and Charles Dickens. And Andrew Carnegie became really enamored of this. And so when he was about 12 years old, being impoverished, his uncle gave him the money for him and his mother to move to the Pittsburgh area, and they immigrated to the United States. And he became a telegraph operator at the age of 12, and went on, by the 1960s, had invested in railroads and sleeping cars and bridges and oil derricks, and he accumulated further wealth as a bond salesman. He raised money for many American enterprises in Europe, and this is what he built in his lifetime, among many other things. The Carnegie Steel Corporation in Pittsburgh, which he sold to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $303,450,000. And after selling the Carnegie Steel Corporation, which is now the U.S. Steel Corporation, for the next several years, he surpassed John David Rockefeller as the richest American. Carnegie devoted the remainder of his life to large-scale philanthropy with special emphasis on local libraries, world peace, education, and scientific research. And with the fortune he made from businesses, he built, Carnegie Hall in New York City, because I always think this is Carnegie Hall in Phoenixville. The Peace Palace Corporation of New York, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Carnegie Institution for Science, the Carnegie Trust for the Universities of Scotland, the Carnegie Hero Fund, and the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh, among others. So here's a man who made all this money, but spent it all to help other people. And Elmira learned about this, and she says, he's our guy. And I don't know if she really said that, but he's our guy. I lived with this woman in my head and in my heart for a year and a half. And as you learn later, she haunted me. If not the library, she haunted me. And so it was like I channeled her. Thank you, but she challenged me, I channeled her. And so you know, if I was her, I'd go, that's my man, okay? So she convinced the Board of Trustees to let her and Colonel Gilkerson approach Mr. Carnegie. And so it was on February 1901 that Burgess, Mr. Parsons, suggested applying to Andrew Carnegie for some money. Now, Colonel Gilkerson, I did a bit of research on him. There's a picture of him in my book, and he has a John Bolton mustache, and he's got this kind of he had a Santa Claus beard, and he had the kindest eyes, and he just did all kinds of things for our community, and he thought he was like a great negotiator. So he goes to Andrew Carnegie, and Andrew Carnegie says, I will work through my agent in New York, Frank Berman, and he will deal with you. And so Gilkerson says, great, because all we need is about $12,000 or $15,000. And through Berman, Mr. Berman, Andrew Carnegie comes back and says, this is not the kind of money I'm going to give you. I'll give you $20,000. So a check was cut with the agreement for $20,000 to the Borough Council, with the stipulation that the borough buy the land for the library, and that they assess the taxpayers a certain amount of money every year for the upkeep of the building and the grounds. So there was some fallow ground, this ground right here, there was another tract of land that was for sale for $2,000, but it was not suitable. I wasn't able to ascertain why, but here we have this property that was owned by the Coffins, originally proposed, and no, that's not right. This was not rejected because of rough terrain. It was another site, I'm sorry, I misspoke. But this Coffin property was purchased for $3,800, and it was never used. In all the years that Phoenixville had been in existence, apparently it was the site of an old Lenape burial ground. Excuse me? The Indians are here. Okay. So, as I said, after negotiations with Mr. Gilkerson and the attorney for the borough and Frank Berman, the money was received. Andrew Carnegie sent down his own plans for the building, and construction began in 1901 and was completed in 1902, and there was a dedication ceremony held here on September 2nd, 1902. And the library, as we know it now, was not the library as we know it then. For example, where I'm standing now, behind me was the main entrance. It's now closed off. The circulation area was over here, all right? That back portion behind the massive fireplace was not there, and so they had these major renovations in 1987, 1988, and a whole lot of different things started to be redone, including there's a big dome, and here, if you look at the ceiling, there weren't these squares when the library was first built. There was a dome that was round and let all this light in. It was just unbelievable. And I couldn't find any pictures. There weren't any in the archives. It would be nice to see what it originally looked like. This is the library in 1915, and notice the spire up on top of the dome. Now, when Mark gave me the tour, I actually got to hold that cap, and it's green patinaed, but it's upstairs in the attic, and maybe it should be brought down and displayed somewhere. I mean, it just was amazing. Around the roof, notice the fencing, the little columns. They were taken down. Actually, the whole roof was replaced because it was leaking and it was really terrible, and we needed an HVAC system and central air and central heat and all that good stuff. But this is the original sign, and notice that the library was only open in the afternoons and evenings, 2 hours in between when it was closed for supper. I guess librarians, they eat too. They don't live on books alone. Now, some of Elmira's duties as library director. I'm sorry, I get a little thirsty talking up here. Elmira's duties as library director included not only overseeing the circulation and procuring books and other reading materials. She managed the staff, she assisted patrons, but she provided monthly as well as annual reports to the Board of Trustees. And this is a little fuzzy, and it's reproduced even better in the book, but this is her last annual report to the library's Board of Trustees. And this is in her very own handwriting. And for some people, this may be very cut and dry, but to me it was very fascinating. I read a number of her reports, and she would tell things like, somebody stole $3.50, an exorbitant sum back then, out of the fines box that was kept on the circulation desk, all right? And there's a story that, at least I wrote the story, that she reported this to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees got really mad at her for letting money be stolen, and she says, I'm a librarian, I'm not a police officer. But they did call in the detectives who came and said, we're gonna find out who stole the money. Well, $3.98, that's okay, fine. These things happen. But anyway, she would write about these things, and she'd write about the number of books that were donated and the number of books that were circulated, and a whole lot of fascinating information that if you were that literary bent, you would find fascinating. If not, well, okay. This is another picture. I have to tell you that a lot of my pictures here and the ones in the book were taken by Richard Gump Devaney, and I want to thank him. I don't see him in the audience today. It's a shame, because I really wanted to thank him, give him a hug, because he's a really great guy, asset to our community. But anyway, when he heard that I was writing a novel about the library, he instantly messaged me and said, yes, you can have any pictures I have. So I wrote Aces to Richard. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, Richard, thank you. All right. Here's an interior photograph that Richard took of the Carnegie Room a number of years ago. And notice the back of the person on the right-hand side, fixing the clock. Who does that look like? Who is that? Okay, it's Mr. Pinto. I again want to say, Mark has been, since I've been writing my novels, one of my great supporters, and I want to thank him very, very much. Mark has been with the library for 22 plus years, is that right?
Yes.
And he started out part-time, and now he's our adult services director. And I think he has done a lot in our community to promote education, to promote local authors, all 20-some of us. And not only, he's a character, but he's also a character in my book. And I don't know how to thank him except for everybody to say, thank you, Mark, for this. Okay, that should last you another year. Thank you, Mark. All right, now, we come to the real reason why you're all here. Is the library haunted? It's an urban legend. And when I first moved here 42 years ago, somebody said, have you heard about the ghosts in the library? I'm like, you're kidding me. All right. Is the ghost really, the primary ghost really, a Miss Elmira Pennypacker? Now, over the course of my young life, I have had some paranormal experiences, and I won't go into some of the details. Scared the out of me. And I'm reluctant to think that the library really is haunted because I'm such a skeptic. But I did a bit of research, and I discovered that there are 5 ghosts. At least they're reputed to be 5 ghosts. And I thought, got to include him in the book. Wasn't going to include him in the book. The first 3 drafts were primarily a ghost story. Then I took out all the ghosts and I exorcised them. And then a friend of mine said, you need to put the ghosts back in, Jim. That's the whole story. Oh no, it's Miss Elmira. But she's a librarian, that's boring. And I said, it's not boring. You know, we've got some great librarians here. We've got Mark and Denise and Christine and Wendy, and I left somebody out, and Michelle. Okay, and I said, you know, you can write about them all day. Got to put the ghost back in, Jim. That's boring. I said, okay. So I asked around, and I contacted some friends of mine who've been in Phoenixville for a number of years, and I said, okay, can you tell me some ghost stories? And they said, yes. So I went back with draft number 14, put the ghosts back in. And I named them. I named them Horace and Janice and Marmaduke and Florence and, of course, Miss Elmira. So let me tell you about each of them, and then you can make up your own mind whether you think they're real or not. They were real in my head when I was writing about them, but, you know, a writer's mental reality is sometimes different than physical reality. So you have to keep that in mind. So here are the 5. Horace. I based Horace, I gave them all their own names. I based Horace on the contractor who, excuse me. Horace the contractor who, in 1887 renovations, was on a ladder. And the ladder was a big tall ladder and stretched all the way over the Herod room. Okay? Now, there's a door that says staff only. And behind those doors, door number 1, is a very steep staircase, winds down to the basement. So the door was open. And here, Horace is on the ladder and he's painting. And it's the middle of the afternoon, and the library is basically empty. I mean, the renovations are going on, so apparently I would think it would be closed, or areas were restricted to the public. And he hears this, "What you doing?" It's this little voice from down below, from the little ladder. And he doesn't look down, he's still painting. And he says, "I'm painting. See, I'm painting." Why? Well, because it needs painting. We're renovating the library, and it's painting. I like the old color. Well, that's not what they want. It has to be this white. And she goes, "Well, I want to change it back." Why? And he gets really aggravated, so he turns around in the ladder and doesn't see anything. So he gets a little upset. And he knocks over the can of paint that was hanging on the ladder, and it spills over, and what forms out of the paint is this little girl. And the contractor is like, "Ah!" And he falls off the ladder, and he goes out the front door, was never heard of again. The little girl, who I named Florence, apparently lives downstairs in the children's library area. And when I was on the grand tour with Mark, we met with Lauren, who was then the development director. Thank you, Mark. And she's in her office, and it's a corner office, and I said, it's kind of chilly in here. And she said, that's because exactly at 2:22, the little girl comes in and visits, and makes her presence known by a draft of cold air. And she looks at me and then looks at the clock, and the clock says 2:22. I'm like, okay, let's get out of here, Mark. So anyway, she lives there, and Lauren told me the story that when she would leave at night, she would move things on the desk, and she'd come back in the morning and everything would be rearranged. So she knew it was probably the little girl, excuse me. So that's Florence. I named Horace. I gave the name to the contractor. I gave him the name Horace, and that ghost now is in the nonfiction department, as well as the reference department, and he's a very angry, grumpy old man, and apparently what he does is on a whim, is he knocks books off shelves. Okay. I have not seen this. I have purposely gone to the back corner of the reference department, okay, shaking in my boots, or my Ghostbuster sneakers, and, you know, waiting, daring. I mean, I don't have any, you know, sometimes you get vibes, you know, like you wonder, and I'm like, no, okay, because I just wanted to tell him, could you please stop that, you know? But anyway, that's just my thing. In 2009, I understand, there's a YouTube public access television series called Scared, and they came to the borough and they did this 45-minute video. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a good thing to watch on Halloween. I just find it a bit of hype. They claim to have sensed some things, but they couldn't really prove anything. And they said that some books were knocked off shelves, probably horrors. I don't know. I don't know whether I believe in it or not. People walking around with microphones trying to listen to, is Elmira behind me now? Is that, okay. No, all right. You never can tell. If she shows up on this video, Mark. Okay. Another story which a past library director contacted me, another past director told me was that there's security cameras around, and a security camera captured this light, this orb, in the center of the film, and it was moving, and they seemed to believe that it was, you know, a ghost, an emanation of something or somebody. And when he went to prove it to somebody, apparently the film was destroyed. So I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not telling these stories to scare you away. Please don't stop you from coming to the library. This is what I heard. But I wrote about this in the novel just because it added. And I will read to you a passage about Miss Elmira actually being a ghost and her experiences. There's a number of books about ghostly phenomenon, spiritual phenomenon in our library. This one is not a particularly good book, but I added it here just to let you know that there are books available in the nonfiction section, and Horace will let you take them out. Okay. Let's go back to Miss Elmira. Besides being our first library director, Miss Elmira was a very prominent citizen, and it's unfortunate because back in the early 1900s, women were not recognized for their accomplishments. You know, women were to cook and to sew and be barefoot and pregnant. And here Miss Elmira grew up to be a librarian who was also a member of the Ladies Auxiliary for the hospital she helped found it. She was an accomplished pianist. She was a member of St. Peter's Church. She served as assistant choir director. She accompanied her father, who loved to sing, on Sunday services when he did solos. She attended various library conferences. And yet, with all of this, she remained single. And so I had to incorporate not only a ghost story, but the story of Elmira's life, but a little intriguing romance. And there was a real-life gentleman named James Sterling Deans, who Elmira had an association with, and I'm not really sure what that association really was. I based my information on her nephew, John Pennypacker's memoirs about his aunt's life. He called her Aunt Minnie. Her original first name was Wilhelmina, but she hated that name, and I don't blame her. And so, but he would call her Minnie. But when she got old enough, she said, no, my name is really Elmira. And he wrote about Minnie and her association with this Mr. Deans. And apparently the story goes that when she was young, Elmira's father did not think anybody would be good enough for her. And so he would chase all these men away. And so the resolution of that is in the novel. And so that is the formal part of the presentation. And if you'd like me to read to you, I'd be more than happy to. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody? Yes, sir?
The first house on the Underground Railroad that you spoke about, was that the restaurant, Becca's restaurant? No?
No. The three primary ones are White Horse Farm, up at White Horse Road. Okay. The Quaker House in the corner stores that's still standing, it's still being used, and Fitzwater Station on the canal. Right? Now, I am sure that there are other places. There are other places around. I know of 2 or 3 in Norristown. There's several outside of Pottstown. But these are the 3 that I primarily know about. Does that help?
No, it helps. No, at the restaurant, they said that was part of the Underground Railroad.
Yes. Fitzwater Station.
No.
Oh, which one?
It's not about Twin Bays and Becca's. Everybody had a ghost or a underground railroad in Phoenixville. It just talked. It didn't literally exist. There was no tracks. There was just places where people would go meet and live to other places.
Thank you. That's right, there weren't any tracks. But there was a gentleman who wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Underground Railroad, where there actually were tracks on it. That's a novel, okay. But no, there were no tracks on the Underground Railroad. True. Okay, anybody else? No? I've answered all your questions? Okay. Shall I entertain you now? Yes. I'll read you two selections. I'll read you 2 selections. This is, the book is basically a memoir. And it's as if Elmira wrote her own diary. So she opens this up by saying, the circulation area of the library today is not at all what it was back when I was the library director. For one, what once was a small area with a desk has been expanded and enlarged to accommodate a large counter with floor-to-ceiling shelves behind and a carpeted reception area in front. At the far end of the reception area are the reference and nonfiction sections to the right, and to the left, a glass-enclosed room dedicated for use by young readers. For 2, my small office, which was once crowded with a large roll-top desk since moved downstairs, is now the small office of Christine, the manager of circulation services. She is a young, lithe, blonde woman who I have lately observed takes her duties and responsibilities quite seriously. It is a pleasure to just sit and watch her carefully and caringly tend to her duties, just as I hope I had. Just outside Christine's office is a large printer angled into a corner, opposite the entrance to the Carnegie Room. Beyond the entrance is the rather large, paper-strewn workstation of Mark, the Adult Services Director. He huddles there, facing his computer monitor, intent upon his work. I enjoy watching him work, too. You know, she's there sometimes, Mark. When he occasionally looks up, he does not sense my presence, even when I stand in front of his desk, which is where I am today, observing the quiet humming of a typical day in my beloved library. There are people sitting at the round tables in the reading areas working on their laptops, students scouring reference materials, doing research, older men and women sitting in front of the large fireplace, reading newspapers and magazines, and readers of every age searching the fiction section for the next great reads. There are even a few who are asleep in easy chairs nestled in corners, and patrons at the circulation desk keep the library busy returning or checking out books. If any of them sense or even see me hovering nearby, they do not acknowledge it. Some do not wish to believe I actually still exist, but I do. Others walk around, peering into the recesses and corners, hoping to find me, as if I could appear to them at will. The art of emanation is not that easy, although I've had 100 or so years to practice. However, I am still working on it. There are a few and far between occasions when I am opaque enough for few to see. These are mostly staff members and the occasional patron. I'm greatly pleased when this happens. It gives me great pleasure to show my patience and my presence and smile, trying to assure them that I and the others are benign, and that, contrary to public opinion, there is really nothing to be afraid of. A short, mousy-haired older woman approaches Mark's desk. He stands to greet her. Mark is a tall, slender, handsome, middle-aged man with a stock of wavy salt and pepper hair and a slightly curved, toothsome, boyish grin. Observing him over the years, I have learned that his grin evinces a great sense of humor, belying a vast knowledge of all things cultural, including classical music and literature. He is, as every librarian should be, a venerable font of information and wisdom, as well as being gentle, kind, and caring, as well as extending and exuding an insatiable joy for life. Hello there, he smiles at the woman. The woman smiles back and shows him a copy of an old newspaper article with the headlines, "Phoenixville celebrates 50th end of the Great Rebellion. Fallen heroes honored with Reeves Park Memorial. Library displays Miss Elmira's messenger quilt." It's dated April 16, 1915, she says. It says Elmira Wells Pennypacker was our first librarian. Indeed, I was. But I wonder where she obtained the article. The event was well over 100 years ago, and surely most of the newspapers back then would have turned to dust. Do you know who Miss Elmira Pennypacker was? Why, yes, of course, Mark says. She was our first director. She took up the mantle, he explained, as the turn of the last century. She served, I understand, in that capacity for 19 years during an era when such positions were dominated by men. And yes, indeed I did. I smiled to myself. She was a woman ahead of her time, he says. Yes, I might have been, but I was not the first. You see, when I was Phoenixville's first library director, I was not the first female librarian in the United States. That honor goes to Mary Foy, who was named head of the Los Angeles Public Library in 1880 at the tender age of 18. And I was not so tender, having assumed my position when I was 39, already a seasoned librarian. Mark frowns thoughtfully, then grins broadly. I am, you know, he says to the woman, very pleased that you were going to write a novel about the library's beginnings and about our dear Elmira. You're welcome, thank you. So Elmira writes in her diary on May 21st, 1915. One afternoon as I was shelving books, a tall gentleman with close-cropped sandy hair and a bushy mustache strolled into the church school library. I'm looking for the Young Men's Literary Union, he said. I'm told this is the place. Yes, it is, I said, turning around. How can I help you? John Sterling Dean's at your service, miss, he said, doffing his black felt hat and bowing slightly. But to be honest, I did not expect to see a woman here. At a Young Men's Association. He had looked around the room, hoping I sensed to find another one of his own gender. But it was a weekday, and all the members were working. The library, except for me and the collection, was quite empty. Now, I must admit, I was instantly attracted by his appearance, his good looks and impeccable manners. He was quite tall, towering over my own statuesque frame. I estimated him to be at least 6'2", if not taller. He was also quite slender, the sharp edges of his shoulder blades well defined by a tan linen suit jacket loosely draped over them. His light brown bushy mustache graced his thin upper lip, crowned by a pencil-thin Roman nose, arched by wide-set, limpid blue eyes. He seemed to me to be about my age, at least no more than 20 or 21, and, forgive me, I suddenly felt flushed. I could feel the blood rushing to my cheeks and a fluttering of butterflies in my stomach. Stranger things have happened, I stuttered. Indeed they have. He paused to look at me for a few rather uncomfortable moments. Standing before him, absent-mindedly clasping several books tightly across my chest, I was suddenly aware of my long reddish-brown curling tresses, haphazardly tied in a bun at the nape of my neck, stray wisps of hair fluttered around my broad face. I knew that I looked a mess, but did nothing to rearrange the stray hairs. Instead, I stared back at him, more than slightly flustered. I have to read the rest of the book. All right, any comments? I have copies for sale. They're only $18.98, and I, you know, if you give me a 20, I give you change of $1, and you can put your 2 cents in. I'd love to have you, you know, doggy biscuits, please. My mortgage is due. Oh, thank you for asking that. I'm working on 2. One is the 7th novel of Phoenixville, and that is about Alliances to Phoenixville, which is our, I don't know if you know what Alliances to Phoenixville is. It means alliances. That's the Spanish word for alliance. It is a story of our immigrant community and how Nina Guzman, who was writing the book with me, she is the executive director, and her organization is helping the immigrants and undocumented people help bridge to a new life. And they've gone through trauma after trauma after trauma, and I'm now learning firsthand what those are. And we are writing this book to make the community aware of this good work and how Phoenixville comes together and helps. And that's what I'm doing. Concurrently with that is a sequel to 4030, which was my very, very first novel. 4030 is about a young girl who learns to play the game of life by playing the game of tennis. And it was basically a romanoclef based on my life growing up in Dobbs Ferry, New York. And that was my first book I published right after I retired. This next novel I'm working on is called Daddy and the Duchess. Growing up between the ages 5 and 14, my father was the chauffeur to Anna, the Duchess of Talleyrand. And she was the youngest daughter of Jay Gould, the railroad magnate, the guy. Okay. They owned Lyndhurst, which was this fabulous summer home on the shores of the Hudson River in Tarrytown. Have you heard of the place? You've heard of it? You've been there, it's beautiful. And my father came home one day when I was about 6 years old. Now, I lived behind a group in a small cottage behind a bowling alley. Okay, it was very, very modest upbringing. And people in our neighborhood had, you know, used Fords, okay? And for somebody to drive home in a 1957 brand new Cadillac Eldorado with the top down, and Daddy gets out of the car and he's wearing full chauffeur's livery, complete with the jodhpurs and the boots, and the peaked hat. And I'm going, what the heck, okay? And so he tells my mother that he got a job being the chauffeur to Duchess of Talleyrand, and he was on call, and that was the beginning of a whole entirely different life for me. And this is my story of my memoirs of growing up with him, because my father passed away when he was 60 years old. And I had just graduated from college, and I did not get to know him. We did not get to know each other as adults. And so this will be my way to channel him back into my life and do that and tell some stories about him. And the Duchess is fascinated. I called Lyndhurst before the holidays, and I said my father was the chauffeur, and they put me on speakerphone to talk to the whole staff. They were like, when are you coming up? You know, we want to hear stories. We want to write about this. So they've given me basically carte blanche, and I'm really looking forward to doing that. And that, writing about that and doing research about that is kind of a counterbalance to the trauma that I'm going through to write about alliances. But I feel that's a story that needs to be told. It's the sequel, I think, to American Dirt, if you've read that novel. That's a fabulous novel, and I really highly recommend everybody read that. But that's what I'm working on. Is that good? Okay. Anybody else? Yes?
I'm glad you heard me make that comment, because I've read so much criticism of American Dirt,
Yes.
and I thought, well, then I guess I shouldn't bother.
No, don't, no.
But you obviously
No, I
experiencing.
yeah, I read, when I read about it in the New York Times, I said I have to read this book. And then I have stacks of all the articles. And you know what? That whole argument is inane. You know why? Because the publishing company today are, all they want is to make money, all right? And they're making money out of the controversy. And Janine Cummings, yes, she's Caucasian. Yes, her grandmother was Puerto Rican, but she identifies as white. It does not matter your ethnicity. It does not matter your color, your size, your gender. If there's a story to be told and you're able to tell it and you do your research correctly, then tell the story, okay? All right? I've gotten flack for my books of Phoenixville, but it doesn't, and I don't care. It does not matter. And I just, read the book. It's a great book. It tells you, it's about Lydia and her son, Luca, and their journey from Guadalupe in Mexico, and what they go through to get to the United States in the hope of becoming citizens, of becoming safe, okay? It's just a fascinating read. And you please, and then, you know what you do? You read it and then you email me, or, contact me and tell me how you like it, okay? But please read the book. Don't let anybody tell you, because somebody wrote this book, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. It does not matter. If there's a story to be told, I'll say it again, then write the story. And read the story that author has written. Okay? That's anything else? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to preach, but I feel very strongly about that. Okay. Now I got it on record. You had it. Okay. Anybody else? That's it? Thank you all for coming. I had a good